The CIA spent years carefully building a spy network in Russia, but one day, sources started to mysteriously disappear.
Good evening. The U.S. government today acknowledged one of the biggest espionage cases in American history.
Networks that took decades to build went dark in a matter of months.
It is a very serious case.
In total, 10 assets were executed. Another 25 disappeared.
They had started rounding up everyone and executing them.
Their entire network of espionage agents in the Soviet Union had been rolled up.
It was hands down the worst intelligence disaster in CIA history. And there was one man responsible for it all.
My God, that's like putting a neon sign over the CIA with a big arrow that says mole, mole, mole.
But there is no doubt in Washington tonight that this is an intelligence disaster.
It's 1985. Inside the headquarters at Langley, the CIA is worried. The unprecedented disappearance of Russian sources is alarming. But before they have time to gather their thoughts, a gift arrives on their doorstep, direct from Russia. A high-ranking KGB officer walks into the US consulate in Rome. He's fled Russia, and in exchange for his protection, he wants to talk. The CIA assembles a small team to debrief Yurchenko. For weeks, they sit across from Yurchenko in a safe house, pulling apart everything he knows. And eventually, Yurchenko gives them something huge. He names a CIA traitor, an agent who was fired and left disgruntled. He tells them that this agent approached the Soviets and poured out everything he knew. The CIA know who it is immediately. Edward Lee Howard, an ex-agent who was fired for failing a polygraph test a few years earlier. As Howard is still on home soil, the CIA passes the investigation to the FBI, and the FBI open a full surveillance investigation on Howard.
He had identified an individual with a code name of Robert, who had volunteered to work for the Soviets, had met with them a number of times, and had been paid money.
One night in September 1985, Howard and his wife head out for an early dinner. An FBI surveillance team follows them. After dinner, Howard's wife drives down a dark stretch of road where visibility is low.
We started driving home. It was dusk. I jumped out of the car after we turned the corner and rolled in the bushes, and a dummy was popped up in my place.
Howard had crafted a foam body double and dressed him with a wig and clothing. When the FBI picks up surveillance again, all they see is the couple driving home into their garage. Meanwhile, Howard escapes the US and flies directly into the Soviet embassy in Helsinki.
American intelligence agencies have put out a worldwide alert for a former CIA agent believed to have been a Soviet mole.
For 11 months, the FBI has no idea what happened to him. But in August 1986, the unthinkable happens. Howard appears on Soviet television, now living under their asylum. He is the first CIA officer to ever defect to the Soviets. The LA Times follows with a damning piece claiming Howard was responsible for wiping out the CIA's entire Moscow station. And just like that, the popular narrative takes hold. Howard is the mole who sold out all the agents in Russia. Sure, Howard was a convenient answer, a mole that was delivered to them by a Russian defector. Case closed. But the case wasn't closed because the losses didn't stop. More agents vanish, and Howard never had access to them. He didn't know their names. He didn't know their missions. Some of them were recruited after Howard had already been fired from the CIA. Howard couldn't explain this. Nobody could.
If events occurred after you know that he no longer has access, then you assume that somebody else is doing the same thing. Something is wrong.
I have parts of the puzzle, but I don't have all the pieces.
And that is when a much darker theory started to take shape inside the agency. One that people didn't want to say aloud. Howard wasn't the only mole.
The CIA didn't want to believe that there was yet another traitor in its midst, but there was simply too much evidence pointing in that direction.
So, in October of 1986, a secret task force was formed within the CIA. Their only mission was to find out what was happening to these agents. Jean Verdefe is put in charge, but with only 4 other people enlisted to help her with the investigation. That's it, a 5-person task force responsible for the biggest security breach in CIA history. and not a single one of them was trained in criminal investigation. The team was set up to fail from the start, understaffed, undertrained, and ignored. It's almost like the CIA wanted them to fail. But despite the lack of confidence from within, Verdefe and her team get to work. But here's the crazy part. That team didn't actually believe there was another mole.
They would not believe that the cause could be a mole. It had to be a broken code, they told themselves. It had to be a bug. It had to be a wiretap. It had to be some snafu in the communication system of the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. Not one of us. It couldn't be one of us.
Assumption that was made is that perhaps KGB technicians had gotten into the secure spaces of the station and had photographed what was in the safes.
The task force flounders for years looking in the wrong direction. It's not until 1991, 6 years after the first agents went missing, that the case gets its first breakthrough. But not for the reasons you may think.
The CIA finally does what it needs to do, which is sends Jean Verdefe back in to find the mole. And the only reason they do it is because Verdefe is close to retirement and has nothing to do. And she goes to her boss and says, I want to relook at the 85 losses. I'm unhappy about how that was handled. So she single-handedly starts the investigation again.
Jean Verdefe pulls her original team back together, and within that team there is one lady who cracks the case wide open. Sandy Grimes.
It really was not until 91 when we said we are going to give this one more shot. We're going to look at everybody who had access to those cases.
And you made a top 10 list, right? More or less. I mean, you made a list of suspects.
Right.
Grimes pulls the financial records of every CIA employee who had access to the compromised sources. 40 names in total. 39 of them check out, but one is strange. Very strange. There are bank deposits of over $1 million flowing through his accounts. On a salary of $70,000 a year? It doesn't make sense. But here's the kicker. This agent was meeting a Soviet diplomat for lunch regularly, and all of these meetings were logged on file. So as Sandy Grimes pulls the logs of these lunch meetings, she then compares them with the agent's bank account, and she notices something strange. After every single meeting with the diplomat, cash was injected into the agent's bank account.
He'd have lunch with Chuvak and say on Wednesday and Thursday there would be a deposit to his bank. At that point, there was no question. There was something very, very wrong, and he was it.
I remember Sandy coming in to see me and standing in the doorway saying, "We got the son of a bitch."
Aldrich Ames.
Aldrich Ames.
Aldrich Ames, the mole inside the CIA.
What you did for money. Stop me if I say anything that's wrong.
He is, of course, a traitor. He only wanted to have money. He was simply a greedy bastard.
So who is Aldrich, also known as Rick Ames? His father was a CIA officer, an alcoholic whose career went nowhere, and Ames followed the exact same path. He joined the agency, and for most of his career, he was unremarkable.
Well, Dan, one of his former bosses called Ames a, quote, lazy, incompetent alcoholic, unquote, and another said he was a third-rate officer. But if you look at his career, he served for 31 years and was never more than a mid-ranking officer. So his performance must have been fairly mediocre.
But despite that, in 1983, he landed a transfer to the counterintelligence unit in the CIA. He was now with the big dogs. Right around this time, his personal life was falling apart. A messy divorce and a new girlfriend, Maria del Rosario Casas, who was spending money like crazy. $5,000 a month on long-distance phone calls back to her family in Colombia, and another several $1,000s more on clothes and shoes. He was trying to impress her, but secretly he was desperate and broke. But lucky for him, he was sitting on some of the most valuable information in the world.
Ames knew that crossing his desk were secrets that were priceless, that were worth millions to the Russians.
So, in April 1985, he walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington and sold 2 names for $50,000. 2 months later, he handed over every CIA and FBI source inside the Soviet Union. The KGB paid him $300,000 for that one. In the blink of an eye, his life changed. Ames marries Rosario, and Rosario knew exactly where the money was coming from. Over 9 years, the KGB would pay him $2.7 million in cash, and they would keep another $1.9 million in a Russian bank account. A total package of $4.6 million, which makes him the highest paid spy in the history of the world. And Ames didn't hide it.
He had, I swear to God, $700 Italian loafers on. This is a man who wouldn't even tie his shoelaces.
They bought this house for cash at the top of the market in 1989, paying over $400,000 for it. And they also bought a brand new Jaguar and a new car.
That's right, his XJ6 Jaguar that he would drive to work and park in the staff car park. A clue hiding in plain sight for anyone who dared to dig a little deeper.
There's old Rick Ames driving around an expensive car, living the high life in Rome. His wife is running up enormous telephone bills and clothing bills, and you're spending money like it's going out of style, and no one is suspicious.
Had a serious effort been mounted in 85, 86, they could have seen a lot of unusual things taking place, which no one else really noticed.
Yep. Nobody noticed for 9 years. But once Sandy Grimes put 2 and 2 together, the FBI finally started to watch. They'd been surveilling Ames for months. They knew his routine. On the morning of February 21st, 1994, Aldrich's Ames boss at the CIA called him to come into work early. He said there'd been an emergency. A few minutes later, he walked out of his front door with a cigarette in his mouth, got in his Jaguar and pulled out of the driveway. FBI agents stop him 1 block over. Ames is taken out of the car. But simultaneously, the FBI was entering his house and arresting his wife, Rosario. Aldrich Ames gave up the names of every CIA source he knew inside Russia. At least 10 were executed and another 25 were imprisoned. He was charged with conspiracy to commit espionage on behalf of the Soviet Union and Russia and tax evasion on $2.7 million in spy payments he received and never declared. Both Aldrich Ames and Rosario were charged on both counts. However, Ames agrees to full cooperation with the authorities, debriefings on every secret he sold. In exchange, he takes a life sentence and she gets 5 years. It took the CIA 9 years to catch this clumsy spy, a bumbling, incompetent drunk who didn't even try and hide the millions he was receiving in payments from the Russians. Aldrich Ames remains a black eye on the face of the CIA that they will never live down. But speaking of moles, there was actually another one hiding in US intelligence at the exact same time. An FBI agent named Robert Hansen. And the crazy part of this one is he was selling out the exact same people that Aldrich Ames was. It's an insane story that I made a fantastic video on, which you should check out now.